Welcome to another interview episode of the Video Game Newsroom Time Machine. We have today a very special guest, a man whose career goes back so far that I think he may have actually been making games before I was born. From Atari over Bally to EA to Sega, Disney. This guy... there is no major company that he hasn't touched in some way. And I am very, very pleased to welcome to the show Roger Hector. Welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. Good to be here.
Excellent. Now, I start off all of these interviews by asking people about their educational background. Try to get an idea of, what were their dreams, their aspirations, what were they shooting for before they ended up in video games?
Well, in my case, when I was a little kid, back in the Jurassic era, there was I was fascinated with cars because there was no such thing as video games back then. So anyway, what I really wanted to do as a kid was design cars. That's what I wanted to do. And it sounded so cool. And anyway, the school that was sort of most well-known, the college, for launching people in a career in that direction was based in Los Angeles, called the Art Center College of Design. And I got a degree in automobile design. I had a full scholarship from General Motors. They recognized me and said, "You got a job here, kid, when you graduate." And so that was back in 1974, I think. And so that was what I was interested in doing and kind of expecting to do. But as it turns out, literally the day I graduated was the day that the economy of the U.S. Had really taken a tumble, and the cost of gasoline in a thing called the Arab oil embargo of its day basically was cutting sales in Detroit. And the Detroit guys came to me and said, "Gee, I'm really sorry, but we don't have a job for you. We're letting our own people go right now." And that was sort of crushingly devastating to a young kid like me. But I managed to find a job. My first paying job, as they say, was I found another job with a company called Huffy Bicycles. And so I got a chance to go design bicycles in Dayton, Ohio. And that was, boy, oh boy, was that something for a kid from California. I really enjoyed the job. In fact, I was designing all these, crazy bicycles, and it was really a lot of fun until I went through like the first winter in Dayton, and it was so cold that I immediately decided I've got to get back to California. So
okay.
An old friend of mine, I'll shorten it up. An old friend of mine from college was working in a little startup that no one had ever heard of in the Bay Area. It was called Atari. And anyway, he said, "Yeah, we can get you a job." So we jumped in the car, and my wife and I and our kids, and we went to the Bay Area and joined this little video game startup that really, all they had was Pong out there. And I had played Pong before, but I didn't really connect the dots. But that was sort of my introduction to the game business. I didn't expect to stay there for a long time, but it turns out I was there for probably 7 years.
Wow. So now what was your official title when you got to Atari?
When I started, I was an industrial designer. And the first thing they asked me to do was to design coin-operated game cabinets. Well, I'd never, you couldn't hire someone with that experience because it didn't exist. So everyone was kind of new to it. And I jumped in, and it actually was pretty interesting in the beginning. And I turned out to be in a really good position to creatively come up with whole new ideas, starting with game cabinets, but evolving into the games themselves. And all of that was really fun. I It was an amazingly entertaining, interesting kind of company, because it was everyone was making it up as we go. There was no experienced people there at all, and we were all half in there just to have the fun of making games, and no one knew if it was going to last very long. We didn't know, so we just sort of guessed that, well, let's make a couple of games now and a few games later, and maybe we'll be in business later on in the year. And that's kind of how it felt. But it was actually an amazing experience, creating what turned into be the giant industry that it is today, of course.
Obviously. Now, I want to separate out those two roles. So let's stick first with the cabinet design. Now, Atari had a reputation, especially in those early days, of being very free-going with their structures. You're just nodding your head. You're like, yeah, that's a nice way of describing it. So, I mean, you're designing a cabinet for a game. Now, what kind of information are you getting about what the game is going to be about, what type of controllers it needs, and how much of those decisions are you making? How much of those are being made by the designers of the game? And my second part of that question is, what kind of budgets are you being allotted? I mean, how much do you have to pay attention to cost of materials and stuff in this, or is it very much just, if the game needs it, do it?
It really was kind of like what you just said just now. Okay. There wasn't any strict adherence to, a cost analysis of anything. Every single thing that happened was following the kind of the theory of Nolan Bushnell, who was the founder of Atari. He constantly just encouraged people to think creative, be creative, try something new. And he used to actually come to my desk. I had a drawing table, not an office, but a drawing table there. And Atari was based in an old roller skating rink.
Oh, wow.
It had been converted to a factory. So the floor where you used to roller skate was a construction factory building coin-operated games. And the little offices around the perimeter of that were the engineering offices and the various creative employees of the company. And so all of that was, it was very casual, and yet it all seemed to come together in a nice chemistry of creativity. And every single thing that I was offered originally, they just said, do this. And I said, okay, I'll do that. But shortly after that, they said, well, come up with some ideas and do something on your own. And then I moved around and just came up with things. And so I kind of got a reputation early on as being an inventive, creative guy that could build things and could, come up with new ideas for games. And that's sort of ultimately what pulled me into being a head of corporate R&D, which was an entirely different world. I mean, that was just truly cost is no object. Try and come up with new things, and it was really quite a lot of fun.
Okay, so the game design aspect now. How familiar were you with circuits? I'm guessing at this point, you guys, you're doing design work before the move to microprocessors, correct?
That's right.
Okay, so how familiar were you with the basics of the electronics that were needed for that kind of game design?
Well, in the beginning, I could just physically see them. Printed circuit boards and power supplies and wiring harnesses and that sort of thing. And I just had to figure out how to assemble those into a box. We'll just call it a box, and then mount a TV set in there and put graphics on the side. I was a graphic artist, and I also did game art in those days. The little overhead name of the game and all that kind of stuff. So I learned a lot of that as you go, and eventually it all sort of came together into a series of products that were the products of Atari back in those days.
Okay, and when you started coming up with ideas for games, mm-hmm. How conscious were you of the limitations of the technology, and how did your ideas, what was the process of taking a rough idea and converting it into something manufacturable?
Well, actually, I think one of the things that I introduced to the game industry was the whole concept of creating a storyboard, because a storyboard was it was a series of drawings typically done for a movie, for example, to help put illustration in addition to the scripting of dialogue, or in this case, a description of what happens in the game. And I was like the guy that the game designers in the day were all engineers. They were all, programmers, basically. And eventually they started coming to me and saying, "Hey, Roger, can you do some screen drawings, some storyboards to create a concept for the game on a piece of paper?" And so, I did that. I enjoyed doing that. And they were very simple games in those days. It wasn't an elaborate illustration, but I did get a chance to kind of be connected into that process, and things like the very first 3D computer game graphics was handed to me as a project by one of the great programmers that Atari had, a guy named Ed Rotberg. He was creating and making and programming basically a game called Battlezone, and Battlezone was the first 3D computer graphic game. And he says, "Design these tanks for me. I want spaceships. I want things that'll put on the screen in 3D." And that was actually pretty challenging in the day, because there was no software package that would help you do that. And without going into a whole big story, that was quite the project in the first place. But I figured out a way to give him the data in a visual form to create 3D objects, and that was Battlezone.
Oh, okay. I do have to ask. So you were giving him the data not just as X, Y, Z coordinates, but in a visual way?
Oh, yeah, there were visuals. The quick story is that when you have an engineering design background and you create a thing that you can draw from the side and from the top and then from the end, in this case, let's call it a tank from Battlezone, you can connect and identify where all of the connection points are of the rays, basically, that create the line drawing that is what that was at the time. And so I did the drawings on paper, but they were scaled and appropriately proportioned to connect all of the dots and lines together.
Oh, amazing. Okay. So you're doing this work together with the existing designers, and when do you actually propose any designs yourself before going off to R&D? Are there any games that you came up with?
Eventually, yeah. It was mostly I started, doing what other people asked me to do. But eventually I said, hey, this would be kind of cool if we, if you take little brick walls like that were used early on and put them in the corners of the screen. And I'm trying to remember the name of the game, to be honest.
Warlords?
Yes. Warlords was a game concept that I sketched out on a piece of paper and presented it. We had brainstorming meeting offsites that were done in the company, and all of the various design and engineering people would come, and I would be able to show up as like the only guy with a picture of what I was presenting. So that kind of helped me a lot.
I'll believe it. Oh.
And everyone else had to just kind of wave their hands and talk about an idea.
Oh. Knowing how to draw can come in very, very handy. So you get moved over to R&D.
Right.
Now, what was the status of the R&D department when you got there?
Well, there was a group that was an offsite group, and they were just referred to as Grass Valley, which is the name of the town that they were in Northern California, a couple hours drive away.
Okay.
And they were a really solid engineering group. They were basically creative engineers, and they were coming up with ideas. They worked for Al Alcorn, who was one of the original founders of the company and a great creative guy. He and I are still good buddies today. We see each other all the time.
Cool.
I went to work for Al, and Al was regarded as the head of R&D for the company and the creative boss of all things. And so he basically he kind of grabbed me and another couple of guys and shoved us together and said, okay, let's do something new and different. And that's what led to the Cosmos game system, if you're familiar with that.
Oh yeah, it was an LED based system that used holograms as was it a background or a foreground image, the hologram?
It was multiple images superimposed over each other, and it was largely a blended image with the LEDs. So it all appeared on the same plane. Okay. So, but basically, I was one of the creators of that. I was involved in sort of coming up with a lot of the sort of core game ideas, and I built all of the physical models that were then turned into and converted into holograms. And so all of the images of what you saw was all stuff that I sort of personally orchestrated in combination with, we had a couple of scientists that were cutting edge, amazing guys that created a system for mass producing holograms. That was what was completely new at the time. No one had ever done that before. And we had these holograms that literally cost pennies a piece that represented, would basically be put into the cartridges. And so it was a completely new and unique, different kind of product.
And now, a couple of things. So, for example, there's images of the Superman game, for example, which has pictures of Superman. So you made the maquettes for that?
Yeah.
Oh,
awesome. The little city.
Yeah.
And all, the little prison, under the surface of the ground. And there was a picture, a subsequent picture of, I think, Superman and, grabbing a monster. I kind of, all of that stuff. Yeah, I did all of the models for everything and all the game visualization for them.
Awesome. Now the product obviously didn't come to market.
Right.
It's canceled. What was the process, the decision-making process internally for that to happen at a company like Atari at that time?
At that time, basically what happened was we were given a green light to go ahead and do the finished production engineering, literally design the boxes that they would be put in. All of the games, everything worked. It was all together. We took it to the Toy Fair, which is an annual toy, commercial event that takes place in New York City every year, and that's where the toy manufacturers could present their new latest games to the toy buyers of the retail industry. We took Cosmos there, and we set up a big display, and we showed it off, and everyone was amazed. And we basically wrote orders for the first year's production capacity for Cosmos. And when we came back from New York, we felt we've just had a huge success. We just wrote the orders for a year's worth of production, and we're good to go. And then about a week later, it was the CEO of Atari at that time had been struggling with trying to figure out what is he going to do, because the demand for the 2600 VCS was way in excess of what they could supply. And so he had to make a decision. Is he going to create a new product and launch and market it, or is he going to put more money into the existing marketplace? And he just told us, he says, guys, we're putting off Cosmos for at least a year so that we can put money into something else. And that was crushing. That was just crushing.
Now, I got to ask, and I know remembering exact years on this kind of stuff can be difficult. Was this then 81?
Yeah, that sounds about right. Sounds about right, yeah.
Okay. But you guys were just told it was postponed, not canceled, or?
Yes. Well, we were told it was postponed, and then as we started to maybe recover from that news, we were later told that now it's been cut off. It's not going to happen.
Gotcha. Now, you mentioned the VCS, and obviously talking about Atari without mentioning the VCS is difficult. Were you still in the coin-op division when the VCS was launched, or were you already in R&D at that point?
No, I was in coin-op at the time. The R&D group really hadn't been established until a little bit later after VCS.
Okay. And what was, internally in the company, because there's been lots of debate later on about, true Atari being Atari Games and so forth. This was years later. The question is, what was the view of the coin-op division of the VCS as it was being developed, and then later on when it launched and became successful?
I think it was the case that the Atari coin-op group regarded themselves and was regarded by everyone else as the premier group. And part of the reason for that is that there's custom hardware being designed for most all coin-op games. And so the engineering group at coin-op were the best of the best. They were the ones that they had the most to work with creatively. They had, they basically could build things like a 3D game like Battlezone, whereas VCS had a fixed set of hardware, and they tried to adapt a lot of the coin-operated games into VCS, but that was so new at the time, and the whole concept of playing games at home on your TV was so radically different and unique that it really mostly mattered not so much the technology and the presentation, but were they fun? If they were fun, they would sell, and they obviously became huge based on that.
Gotcha. So when you were at R&D, besides the Cosmos, was virtually all of the development in the direction towards consumer product, or was R&D also responsible for trying to develop that custom hardware for the coin-op division?
We mostly worked for, or most of what we did was targeted for the coin-op division because it had the most flexibility in terms of what they could spend. And we created completely new kinds of coin-operated games. Some were prototypes that worked, but relied on some exotic new video projection technology, and so they only built one, something like that. So we did that. We had an elaborate race car that looked like a real race car that you would climb into, and you'd steer the steering wheel, and the interior would swing left or right depending on what's going on. And it had a huge projection screen with a video projector, one of the early ones that was water cooled.
Oh, wow.
Tell you how good that would be, right? But
yeah, that's going to last really long in an arcade. That's never going to need any kind of servicing.
Building that kind of thing, well, it worked. And we actually put it in a local arcade, actually an amusement park arcade that had a huge traffic, and it instantly became their number one product. It's just we couldn't manufacture it. We couldn't build it. So it was sort of a fun experience, but we moved on to do other things.
Gotcha. Now another point I wanted to ask about was, of course, Atari also gets into the home computer business in '79. Was R&D at all involved with the development of those products?
We didn't have much direct involvement with like the engineering creation of it, although we did some things purely voluntarily. We came up with ideas. We said, well, let's see about taking these Atari computers and packaging them in a way that we could take out to schools, because schools had never had a computer for kids to touch. And this was something that we wanted to sort of break the ice on doing that. So we literally got a van and we painted Atari logos on the side, and we loaded it up with specially packaged and created computers that could just be picked up in one, as one load out of the truck, set down on a table in front of a kid, and they could start to, get instruction on how to use it and how to play it and what it does. And that was it wasn't a big project. It was kind of a small project, but we really wanted to see about introducing computers to schools. I think that must have been one of the earliest efforts in that regard.
Very cool. And so R&D has a reputation now for having tried all sorts of weird things that went beyond video games as well. Any recollections of any particular projects that never went anywhere but that were a little bit out of the ordinary?
Oh gosh, there were all kinds of experiments. Some of them went right and some of them went wrong. When we were originally designing holograms, we had to build a holographic laboratory, and no one, that kind of thing didn't exist. So we rented an office building that was away. It was still in the neighborhood of the rest of Atari, but it was kind of separated away. And we bought the biggest lasers that were possible to buy, the most powerful ones. And unless you were in the military, you couldn't get these, right? We got the best that we could get. And the one of the little, part of that was involving experimenting with laser beams. and we had to, we played around with laser beams, but these were laser beams that would like burn a hole right through the wall if you let them go away or be uncontrolled in some sense. and we occasionally fooled around with, like, after hours. We had a very regimented program of disciplined engineering with these lasers. But, when everyone went home at the end of the day, a few people hung around and we started playing around with what could you do? Could we hit that mountaintop over there with a laser beam? and we found that if we turned the volume or the power way back, we could aim a laser beam across town and hit a stoplight. And if you hit a stoplight the right way with the laser beam, it just lit up. And so we were kind of messing around with traffic flow a little bit. And then we realized, no, we're going to get ourselves in big trouble. So we stopped that.
Oh, man. Sorry, I'm just imagining you guys doing that. Okay. So ultimately, of course, Atari does not end well, but I believe you leave Atari before the crash, right?
Right.
Now, how did that departure come about?
Well, I think legitimately it was inspired by the pushing of Cosmos away. We just said, well, wait a minute, what are we doing here in R&D if we can't put a successful product into the marketplace? So myself and a couple of other, really a couple of the best engineers the company had. I mentioned Ed Rothberg before, a great programmer, and Howie Delman was not only a programmer, but also a hardware engineer. And the three of us kind of got together and said, let's go start our own development company and see what we can do. Because I can do a lot of the other stuff, and between those guys, we could figure it all out. And so we started a company called Vidya. And Vidya, it was a startup. It started with the three of us. And it turns out that Nolan Bushnell had invested and bought an old junky office building that he wanted to renovate and turn into a I forget what the term they use now, but a basically
incubator.
That's it. You helped me out.
No problem. That's what I'm here for.
Incubator. And we literally were the first ones in his incubator. This was an abandoned building that was all beat up, and the roof leaked, and everything about it was not good. But we got it for free, at least initially. And that was the motivation that caused us to, okay, we have a free office. We can start doing this stuff. And so we started, I put together some contracts for some games, and we started building coin-op games, and we made some 2600 BCS cartridges. Very little of what we actually did got produced, even though we sold it in a couple of the titles. We sold them a couple of times, but that was right at the sort of collapsing time of 1983, 84, where the industry was just falling apart. And so the opportunities disappeared for us to produce those games, but we still managed to be involved in the coin-op business. And we were one of the few small contract available entities that knew how to do coin-op games. And so then we wound up changing our name and sold ourselves. The name became Sente Technologies. We sold ourselves to Nolan because we all knew each other. And Nolan bought Vidya under his corporate entity of Chuck E. Cheese.
Okay.
So Chuck E. Cheese bought Vidya, became Sente, and then Sente was going to be Nolan's re-entry into the games business. See, he had left Atari a few years ago, and he had a contract that prevented him from competing for several years. Anyway, we were the basis for what was going to be his reentry, and we started designing games, and we built a whole extensive series of Sente Technologies games.
Oh, okay. Now, I do have to go back for just a second because my understanding of the timeline, and you can correct me if I'm wrong here, the Chuck E. Cheese concept started before Nolan left Atari.
Yes. It was a project. It was a coin-op project.
Okay. Was R&D at all involved in the animatronics that would ultimately be used at Chuck E. Cheese, or was that a separate development?
That was a separate development. We didn't have my R&D group didn't have anything to do with that.
Okay.
We were busy doing Cosmos, but yes.
Gotcha. Okay, sorry, just sidetracked there. So the Sentai games, were those, you guys were a wholly owned subsidiary of of Chuck E. Cheese at that point?
Yes.
And Chuck E. Cheese made it through the crash fairly unharmed.
Yes.
As I was a child who grew up going there on a fairly regular basis.
Yeah.
Love the heck out of it. Now, with that in mind, how obviously it's not the heyday of Atari anymore. It's not the you can spend whatever you want attitude, I'm guessing, any longer.
Right.
How did that change the development of your coin-op games in relation to what it had been like at Atari?
Well, one of the things that Nolan really wanted to do is he wanted to introduce a different kind of coin-operated game. In this case, I sort of knew this going in, and I had already designed, like years ago, a different kind of cabinet that was not made out of wood. It was made out of steel, welded steel with bolt-on panels. And I got a patent on that for Atari. But in this case, Nolan was sort of inspired by us creating a convertible game system for coin-op. And that's what the Sente system was. It was called the Sente system. But you'd start with an A cabinet, and then each game was literally a cartridge. It was a PC board, but it plugged into the motherboard, and then the graphics and the control panels would be stuck on. And then you could change a coin-operated game from one to another without having to physically pick it up and move it around in a pickup truck, which was kind of how it was done in those days. And that was such a revolutionary idea in the coin-op industry that actually he took a lot of orders for it just by being Nolan Bushnell and having this kind of revolutionary new game system with some really good-looking games in it. And that was basically what got us off the ground.
Very cool. I got to ask, how do you spell Sentes? Because
you can look it up. It's Sente.
Yeah.
It's Sente. And there's a name connection, an ironic name connection to the game, or to the name Atari. Because Atari is a term that comes from the game Go. If you're familiar with Go.
Yes.
Okay. Well, when you're about to win in Go, you say Atari. It's kind of like check in chess, And there's another term that if you have a counter to someone's Atari, you say Sente.
Okay.
And that's where the name came from, it's a counter to Atari, and very few people would know that because not very many people play Go and know the terminology connection. So
that's cool.
So that's something. I mean, that's a little nugget of gaming history right there.
Very, very cool. And I'm looking here right now at the Wikipedia page, and listeners of these interviews always know that there's extensive links to sources of everything that we're talking about in the show notes. I'm seeing that you guys, for example, had a Trivial Pursuit license at one point, but I'm guessing that that's later on when Bally has already purchased the company, correct?
Yeah, I think that sounds right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you guys were developing the cartridge-based system.
Right.
And what percentage of the sales were going to Chuck E. Cheese outlets, and how many were going to other places, to arcades and operators?
Well, we as Sente were sort of their engineering group, their creative product development group. We didn't manage the finances in those days. All of the finances were managed at Chuck E. Cheese corporate.
Okay.
And so what we found out was, and kind of what the sequence of events was, that Sente got off to a good start, and we had a factory and we were building games. But then Chuck E. Cheese ran into their own kind of world of financial difficulty that was purely 100% based upon the sort of the corporate management of finances internally to the pizza chain. And so they wound up realizing that in order to resolve or give themselves a chance, to fix that they would sell Sente Technologies, because we had all the promise of being a successful video game development company that would be. We were attracted by Bally to basically buy us as something for their future. And that's kind of that's when that transaction got inspired. Nolan put it together and basically came to work one day and said, "Hey guys, we're now Bally Sente."
Now, was Nolan still involved with Bally Sente?
Yes, yeah, he was. He didn't. He wasn't around all the time, but he would, and everybody liked Nolan, and he would come and show up and just hang around in the engineering offices and chat it up and see what's going on. But he wasn't giving what we would call, or what you would call, a direct assignment. Here's the strategy. You guys do this. You guys do that. We were kind of doing that on our own, but we enjoyed having Nolan around. Nolan was quite the character, and he knew me from way back when I was doing drawings on my drawing table. He'd come and take them in the middle of the night, and I'd have to go the next day to his office to go find them and get them back so I could finish them. He just liked to look at stuff, and so we had that relationship.
Oh, awesome. Now, I do have to ask, because Nolan has that very dramatic break with Atari in the 78,
right?
And was he a different person? Had he changed personality-wise, or at least managerial-wise, from when you knew him in the early days of Atari and the time that you're working with him again at Chuck E. Cheese?
I tend to think of him really as kind of the same guy. Everyone was evolving. The industry was evolving. He went to become a kind of a global celebrity character, and so he had many different activities that were going on in his life. We were just one of them. And if you read about Nolan and his personal past, he's done lots and lots of different things. We were, at that point in time, we were kind of a place that he would come by and reconnect to the good old days a little bit. But he had a lot of other things going on.
Yeah, of course. Okay, so now you guys are part of Bally. What was what impact did that sale have on your operations? And I guess what was the corporate culture of Bally like at that moment? I think we're talking 84 here, if I got the timeline right.
That's probably about right. Bally was radically different. It's a Chicago-based, large, complex corporation that does deal with entertainment, but is largely focused on gambling.
Mm-hmm.
So the casino operations, the slot machines, all of that is a big part of Bally. But they also owned, they owned Six Flags amusement parks, and they owned, they had other businesses, and we were kind of this creative footprint in Silicon Valley, so to speak. But they also had a Bally Gaming video games. They made pinball machines and video game coin-op video games. And one of the decisions that we liked in the beginning of the relationship was that we got to keep our factory in the West Coast and build the Sente products and be more self-contained. But a decision that got made subsequently was that Bally wanted to basically use all of the manufacturing of the Chicago-based operation to build the Sente games. And that became sort of a problem, because there was a sense of competition. It's like you got Ford and Chevrolet, Ford wants to build all of the Chevrolet cars, and you're going, wait a minute, what could possibly go wrong, right? Well, all of that stuff ultimately, through time, led to a kind of an adversarial relationship. And it reached a point where Bally wanted eventually to shut down the California operation entirely and move us, the employees, to Chicago. Nobody wanted to do that, so it basically kind of collapsed the whole Bally Sente operation at that point.
Gotcha. Now, you also did a little bit of work for Six Flags, or maybe not. I know you did work on Six Flags attractions. How did that come about?
There was. I think my recollection is that there was a kind of a memo passed around saying, "Hey, if anyone has any interesting ideas for the theme park group, they were interested in seeing what was possible." And we jumped on that. I mean, I said, "Oh yeah, come on, let's make some amusement park attraction," because we felt we could do it. We didn't know, we wouldn't have to build the track that the cars rolled around in. We wouldn't have to do that, but we knew how to do all of the sort of the staging, the electronics, the entertainment part of it. And we wound up building a dark ride where the riders, it was called the Huntington Hotel. And it was a dark ride that basically you got to ride around in a car that moved on a track through this dark building. But each seat had a Ghostbuster gun mounted in front of you that you could aim at the ghosts. And we had lots of ghosts. We knew how to make holograms, right?
Yeah.
So we had ghosts. They were all animated. They were all sort of storytelling. And you moved through this hotel called the Huntington Hotel in a Ghostbusters car. And you could shoot at target ghosts and make them animate and disappear. And you got points for that. And as you left the ride, you'd see what your score is. So it was kind of a video game. Nothing like that had ever been done before. We designed it all, and we physically built a a kind of a prototype of it, but then Bally changed their management, and they said, "We'll build this someday, but we won't build it right away." So I don't think it ever got built. I'm pretty sure it didn't, but it was a finished thing. There were all kinds of cool aspects of it. We had it working in California, but it was going to go to Six Flags in Texas, and it never got built.
Did it actually have a Ghostbusters license, or was that just something that you guys were making it Ghostbusters-like?
As I was doing some of the concept illustration for it, I always put Ghostbusters licenses on it. The logos.
Yeah.
It had that conceptually presented, but there wasn't a Ghostbusters license that was actually purchased for it.
Gotcha. And I want to say, because I used to live in Florida, there was a Ghostbusters ride at the Universal theme park.
Yeah.
In Florida, that is exactly what you're describing.
I haven't been there, but this was what? This was in the 80s. So, yes, we did that for Universal, for Six Flags, and they told us they were going to kind of put it on the shelf. So it wouldn't shock me if they did something with it later, but that's news to me, actually. Okay,
I know there was a ride that had exactly that mechanic, that mechanism in it, where you had guns. It was a dark ride. Stuff would pop out. You had to shoot at it from the ride. And I don't remember if it was a Ghostbusters theme or it was some other theme that used a similar mechanic. Sorry, but the way that you're describing it, I've seen that ride. Yeah. And I just now I'm going to be breaking my head open trying to remember it. I'll cut this out of the interview, but as soon as I find it,
as soon as I find it, send it to me. I want to see it.
Yeah. Okay. Wait. Here's one. Here's one. Wait. I just found it. Sorry. This is all not ending up in the interview, but here. Here, there's a link in the chat.
Okay.
And it's got video, and it looks just like what you're talking about.
Okay. I'll have to check it out.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry. Getting lost on tangents here. So so Bally, the culture is very different, much bigger thing. They take your guys' manufacturing away. The company dissolves. What is your next move?
Well, when our contracts expired, coincidentally to them wanting to move everyone to Chicago, I basically decided, and several people decided, no, we want to stay in the Bay Area, which is where we lived. And so I wind up talking to some friends that I knew at EA, and one thing led to another, and basically I wound up interviewing at EA, and I had some background and skills that they were looking for. And so Trip Hawkins, the head of EA, founder, and Bing Gordon, basically those two guys kind of together said, Roger, come on in, and we want to put you in charge of developing all of the sports titles. Sports action and arcade is what they called it. And so, so EA Sports, it wasn't EA Sports at that time. It was just the sports category games and arcade and action games. So I was the senior producer at EA, sort of brought in to help pull together a group to do all of that. And there were some talented people, but It was kind of disorganized. They wanted me to help make it happen, and I was there for a while. Help. We did make it happen.
Definitely.
We put games like John Madden together, which is still being produced these days. I'm going, wow. That was John Madden on the Apple II.
Oh, wow. Now, that was a game that had been in development hell for quite a while, for quite a few years.
Yes.
So when you got there, the project was still ongoing, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
And it was very much in hell, yes.
Describe... okay, so you show up. They're telling you this is your category. Do you still recall a rough rundown of the games that were currently in development when you got there?
Boy, that's a tough one. Certainly Madden was. Michael Jordan and Larry Bird was also right in that time period, which also turned out to be a very successful game, of course. We had games like, there was a funny game called a Caveman Olympics. Olympics, right?
Yeah.
That was really a humorous, kind of funny cartoon game. We had a mini golf game,
Zany Golf. Zany Golf.
Zany Golf. And then there was, there were some other ones. And one of the problems of just trying to remember all this stuff is that it's been well over 100 games that I've done.
Oh, of course.
I stopped counting long ago, and I'm trying to remember, okay, what were the games at that time? But I know that, the people that really deserve credit for getting a lot of the, doing a lot of the pick and shovel work were guys like Don Traeger, who everyone was new at doing this. These were all new things. And I will say this, the John Madden game was, I believe, originally the idea of Trip Hawkins. And he's the one that insisted that John Madden actually participate in the design of the game, because the tradition of licensed titles in, sports titles connected to game was purely superficial everywhere else. And in this case, it was Tripp that said, no, we've got to get John to contribute his own thinking, his own strategy, his own play style into this game. And that's really what triggered it for Madden. He didn't want to be just a name stuck on a box somewhere. And so that, I think, was really one of the key creative aspects of EA and what turned into a successful series of games. Was trying to derive sort of the sim value of those characters. And literally, the modern John Madden game is all about the players, who the players are, and what are their statistics, and how do they do, and they change, every season. And they have a whole giant team of people that have been working on Madden for many, many years.
Yeah.
But back in those days, it was just a couple of people, and the Apple II was the first platform it was done on, and it was not a graphic computer by any manner of means. And so one of the things that we did was to try and leverage greater graphic processing ability to the subsequent versions. So the Amiga version and the Commodore 64 version, could create much more attractive visuals. And so I think the early success of this was tied to the authentication, the use of the sports celebrity, combined with kind of increasing graphic value to make it seem more realistic or more interesting, more exciting. And that's kind of where I was.
Okay. Now, when you got there, was Skate or Die already out, or was that?
No,
No, not yet.
that was in production.
Okay. Now, my understanding is Skater Die was the first game that EA developed internally,
Yeah, I
as
think it was.
opposed to using outside
Yeah,
developers.
yeah. EA was originally developed on the concept. This was another Trip Hawkins concept of game developers are kind of like rock stars, celebrities, music bands, and so he introduced the concept of promoting the developer group as like a band. It would happen in music, and all of that was great because it attracted some really strong talent that wanted to be published by EA, but it also, it had its downsides too. And in this case, one of the values of having an in-house group is that you can actually have a lot more control over what goes on. And so that was an experiment whose time had come at EA, was to develop internal development. And I think that's part of the reason why they brought me on board, because I've been doing that for years.
Gotcha. And so that transition away from outside developers to building in-house talent, what was your strategy for developing those teams? And was it difficult to train EA, this existing publisher, to start to manage budgets and so forth for those internal teams?
From kind of a business management standpoint, it was sort of new territory in a bunch of ways. EA was generally regarded as a success story at that point in time. They weren't, they still hadn't gone public yet. They still hadn't done some of those types of things, but they had put solid products into the marketplace on a regular basis. They had hits. So, okay, that's cool. But everyone was making it up as they go. And I would say in some ways, at least for me personally, it was a bit more of a difficult adapting process. Many people in the group had very different ideas about how things should be done, and it wasn't as easy for me personally. I kind of reached a point where I thought, maybe I'm better off somewhere else, to be honest. And so I did. I left EA, but not feeling terrible. It was really the case that I had a different opportunity that came along, and I highly respect the EA talents, particularly the guys that I work directly with. They were amazing. They were excellent, and they continued to do good stuff. So I don't have anything bad to say about EA. I mostly went off to do something that I was more attracted to.
Gotcha. And before we go to that next step, because you had come from coin-op and primarily worked in that field, EA was EA the first time that you had to deal with the idea of porting to multiple systems?
Yeah, I would say that would be a first for them.
Okay.
For me, yeah.
Yeah. And from a producer standpoint, what were the difficulties in that learning process? Because I can imagine that with all the different platforms and, like you already described, the different graphical capabilities and so forth, creating products that felt unified under one banner in one box, but were still being launched on all these different systems that weren't underpowered on the more powerful systems and still played decently. What was that? What was it like to have to manage that particular problem?
it was an ongoing series of surprises. Obviously, that was sort of the goal going in, and saying, okay, we're going to make this game. We're going to do Jordan versus Bird, and we're going to be on this platform and this platform and this, and then trying to make it actually happen was challenging. And it was at a time, again, this is a long time ago, there weren't thousands of game developer people available to do things. So you kind of had to work with the group that you had, and not everyone could solve certain types of problems. And so there was it wasn't the case at that time that there was game development infrastructure that was to serve as the basis for lots of games. Everything was being made up as it went. And so there was lots of surprises, lots of problems that had to be dealt with. And eventually the game industry did evolve into having, things like Unity that is used as a common sort of foundation language for many, 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 not all, but many types of games. And those days did not really have some of those advantages that exist today. So there was a lot more invention that had to take place along the way.
Okay. Now, that invention, did that include things like creating design documents that the different teams working on different platforms would have to follow? Or was it more an issue of passing on a general idea of the game and letting a new team on a new platform start from scratch and see what they could pull off? Was there any kind of standardization while you were there for that process?
There's always an attempt to be made at efficiency, and to the extent that sharing certain code pieces or code chunks or graphic solutions to certain problems, we would obviously try and do that as much as possible. But it wasn't the massive sort of available systems that exist today. Graphics were created on different types of platforms depending upon what the artist was trained to do. And then the companies that produce those tools, they're constantly upgrading and changing what they're doing. So there's not a real stability to stand. There's no stable ground to stand on in those days. You're doing the best you can as fast as you can, trying to get it out the door, trying to make it work, and the process of testing and debugging, all of that is something that evolved or has evolved dramatically since then. It was pretty crude back in those days. So yeah, like I say, it was a lot of surprises.
Gotcha. Okay, then the opportunity you went to was Disney, correct?
Yes.
So how did that opportunity come about? Did they approach you, or did you have a contact? What was the story?
They approached me. A gal that I highly respect and have enjoyed working with even to this day. Her name is Shelley Miles. She had been a senior exec at Disney for a long time, working in the consumer products division. And she basically ran the consumer music business for Disney. Okay. She was enticed to take over strategically the whole idea of interactive entertainment, because this was at a time when Hollywood was starting to recognize that games and interactive entertainment was the future or a future. And they had to get established. They had to get their feet on the ground somehow to start developing skills and experience in games and interactive entertainment. So she basically was taking over and starting up a division of consumer products called Disney Software. And so this was back in the day when all software was bought in a box, in a retail store. Maybe you had it shipped to you, but it was basically a disc in a box, and that's what you got. And she approached me, and I was so excited to join Disney because I figured I'm going to learn more there than anywhere I could ever go. And so I moved my family down to LA very excitedly with the idea that we were going to create some games, but also tools. We didn't just do games. We did a whole variety of things that were based on Disney licenses. The Disney properties, the Mickey Mouse and Donald Duck properties are one thing. But we had a product called the Disney Animation Studio.
Mm.
That was the creation of a gentleman named Reichard von Wolfschild, who's an amazingly creative guy, who brought it to Disney and wanted to basically leverage the Disney license into a tool that teaches you the traditional techniques of Disney animation, how to animate via Disney. And this was such a cool product. I loved it. I absolutely loved it. I worked with them. It wasn't finished. It had a long ways to go, but that was a category of product for Disney that turned out to be great. But we also did, we made Mickey Mouse type games as well as things like print shops. Just selling Disney art, established art, was a big business. And so we tried a whole variety of things. And we also started some things that had nothing to do with the traditional Disney properties. We were given a free range to kind of come up and do whatever we wanted. And in a short few years, we produced a whole range of different titles that included all kinds of different stuff. But I loved working there. It was my favorite place to work for sure, just because I got to hang around with the Imagineers. I got to meet and know some of the most sort of talented, creative people around. And that was quite the experience for me.
I can only imagine. I've spoken to a couple of other creators who had worked with Disney licenses before that. Al Lowe from Sierra, he had done Donald Duck's Playground, and I talked to Ken Williams of Sierra because they had purchased the license. And Al Lowe had these wonderful memories of being invited in the early 80s, and he's going past these giant stacks of drawings from old animated films, and he's a huge fan of the film, so he's just like, stuff's just laying there. So I do have to ask, because one thing that they both talked about was that at least in the early 80s, Disney was, I'm sure they still are, very, very protective of how their licensed characters are portrayed.
Yes.
And that was always a very difficult balancing act, especially given the limits of the technology.
Yes.
So how did Disney's internal, and were you guys doing internal software development, or was it all just setting up projects and farming them out to outside developers? I guess should be the first question.
We started by farming it all out. But as time went by and as some success, was had, we started bringing people in that could really run and manage internal development too. It was sort of a transitionary process. But the way it was originally managed, I worked not for, but with Disney licensing, and they gave me the hardcore, crushing. Here's how you do it, boy, kind of situation. Here's how we manage this, and don't make any mistakes because it's not good. And yeah, they are a tough, and I think legitimately so, organization who insists on a quality product result from a license that they sell. And I'll give you an example. Sega had bought a license for a Donald Duck game that they were making. And the Donald Duck game included a piece in which Donald Duck is fighting off seals, baby seals, with a club.
Oh no!
I'm looking at what they did. This was made and animated and working in Japan, and they sent for approval. And I'm looking at this. I'm going, no, this is not going to work. Clubbing baby seals is not going to work. And so some of that kind of thing, sort of, I worked with them. I knew how to work with game developers, and I knew how to work with the licensing people. And I, tried to keep everyone happy by potentially offering an alternative solution or a different way to do it. Maybe just change the graphics a little bit to do something that turns out to be not offensive or problematic. And so, yeah, I had some firsthand experience at dealing with that too.
Oh, hilarious. I'm guessing that was Quackshot, wasn't it?
That's a good guess. Yeah, that's a really good guess.
Yeah. And I played the game. It's fascinating, and I can totally see how there's some weird scenarios in that game, so that makes perfect sense. Yes. Sorry, I'm just imagining that in that animation style right now in my head. It's okay. So were you there then at Disney when Aladdin for the Genesis comes out? Was that during your tenure?
Yeah, it's right in the zone of, I don't know if it was finished when I left or not. But yeah, I mean, I remember it in production. I'm a little fuzzy on some of the details, but yeah.
Because that, most people consider that like a seminal moment when suddenly the Disney license meant something very different in gaming for quite a few years. Yeah. So when I could not get an answer to this from the one of the main people over at Capcom USA at the time. So I thought I'd ask you about this. How did it come about that two different companies got licenses for that game and you end up with two different designs, one for the Genesis and one for the Super NES? Do you have any recollection on that?
I think I said earlier that I'm a little fuzzy on it. I'm not completely sure exactly what happened. Although I do know that licensing of Disney properties in general was something that could be split. A single property could be split between two different licensors if they weren't directly competing. So if they were on different platforms, for example, I can see how that would have worked potentially for both sides.
Okay, gotcha.
It's a guess.
It's a guess, but it would explain quite a few games that ended up in the same, not as high profile. Darkwing Duck had a similar situation with two very, very different game designs ending up on two different platforms.
Yeah, I think
TurboGrafx 16 and stuff. Yeah,
I think it's the different platform thing that would separate them.
Okay, gotcha. Okay, that makes perfect sense. So you're at Disney. I'm not sure if this overlapped with your time at Disney, but Disney did try to get into PC hardware with I believe it was called the Sound Source. It was an external
yes.
sound card. Can you tell me anything about how that project came about? Because it just seemed like a really awkward or weird thing for Disney to be getting into.
It's one of these.
Oh, my goodness, you've got one. Yeah, you're holding it up.
When sitting here.
Oh, my God.
Yes. Yeah, no. I just happened to have one sitting here. Yeah, I remember this. This was basically an effort to incorporate the actual recorded voices of the Disney characters, Mickey Mouse, Donald Duck, that group, into a preschool game. One of the things that, and we developed it. I designed this.
Oh, really?
So,
cool.
Yeah. So that's why I have it sitting here. But they, Disney had the idea of expanding the sort of the common user base to include preschoolers because of the high appeal of the Disney characters in that age category. And there was a special target, a consumer target of parents with young kids that would learn. These were learning games, sort of, that were intended for parents to sit with their kid kind of in their lap in front of their computer, because kids didn't have computers in those days. And that's why it was designed to not, to look like a computer add-on device, even though there's a secret. Well, it's not really a secret, but I can't. It won't show up if I show it to you. But these grid lines across here have a circle in the center where the speaker was, and on the outside edges there are two mouse ears on either side of this to create a Disney logo.
Oh, that is cool. Yeah, I can't see it here. It's out of focus, but I could probably find a picture of it online.
Yeah, maybe. But it's a very, very subtle little kind of hidden design gag to make it a Disney product, right? But basically it sat on the, you plugged it into a computer in those days, and we were able to reproduce the actual recorded digitized voices of the characters, and then incorporate that into, there were 3 products that were created. I think that was it. For preschoolers, there was Mickey's ABCs, which was teaching ABCs, Mickey's 1, 2, 3s, which is basic number counting, and Colors and Shapes, which was a category of things that little kids and parents could point to the screen and go, and there was a little animated Mickey and Donald and such on the screen that were pointing out these different shapes. So that was actually, it was very successful because no one had ever done anything like that before. There was no competitive products. And because it really carried with it the kind of the signature voices that everyone knew from the characters and the animations of them on the screen, it was a very popular thing.
Gotcha. Yeah, I just remember seeing it in ads for a Dick Tracy game that you guys also brought out, which may or may not have been as successful.
Well, yeah, Dick Tracy. It was okay. It was a movie-based game. It was pretty simple. It was, those at that time, movie-based games were not as massively huge as like Marvel games are today. So yeah, there was a Dick Tracy movie that came out, and it made sense. Let's try and make a game that kind of ties into that. And yes, we had some character voices and special sound effects and things, signature sound effects that happened in the game that went that way.
Now, I do have to ask here because Dick Tracy is a particular, if you're a Commodore 64 fan, Dick Tracy has a very special space because it's considered one of the worst games ever released. Now,
how lucky can you get? Yeah.
You guys didn't make that version, though. That was licensed out to Titus in France. And now, because were you involved with that kind of external licensing? Because I'm very curious how that process would have worked back then.
The quick answer to that is no, we didn't have anything to do with it. That was a pure licensing project. When I was involved with Disney licensing, it was through Consumer Products Division, and film was a completely different division. They did their own licensing.
Oh, okay. So, when you guys made your Dick Tracy game, it would have been a non-exclusive, or I guess I need to ask this because I've talked to somebody. I did an interview with one of the people from LucasArts, and back then, before it was bought by Disney, they would actually have to make their case because they had their own game division. They would have to make their case to the licensing people that they should be able to acquire the license, that they were the best bet. Otherwise, the license would go someplace else. Now, Did you have that kind of internal structure at Disney as well for Disney software?
I would say no. We were the insiders.
Okay.
We didn't have to beg. We just said we just had a meeting. We talked to them. We said, hey, we wanted to leverage the value of the movie's promotion to help promote the game, and then conversely using the value of the game promotion to promote the movie. And we were all Disney. We were just kind of internal guys, so we didn't have to do that. But no, I know that the licensing film licensing group was a completely separate entity, but they were still Disney.
Oh, okay. Was there ever a time when you wanted to, you were like, oh, we should do something for this, and the licensing said, oh, sorry, we've already sold the license to somebody else?
Actually, I can't think of any time that happened. We pretty much could lay our hands on whatever we wanted to. We did quite a number of Disney licenses, but we also, as an internal group, we wanted to create value in our own creations. And so that was one of the sort of goals and objectives of our group was to build value that could be licensed to others, maybe somehow. We'll sell the movie licensing rights to Lucas or something.
Gotcha. Okay. And since we're at Disney, there's one more product I wanted to ask about because it also seemed a little bit out of it, not quite in line. There was a program I believe you guys released which allowed people to build roller coasters and then ride said roller coasters.
Right.
Okay, because that's obviously not leveraging an existing Disney property. Disney parks are not really known for their roller coasters. How did that project come about?
Well, as I recall, and I'm a little bit fuzzy on it, but as I recall, that was one of a couple of projects that were presented from our internal team saying, hey, we could do this as a game, as a computer program that would be fun. Even though Disney may not be known for being pure roller coasters, Disney has plenty of roller coasters, but they generally wrap them in a fantasy environment. And so, whether it's the Matterhorn ride or something, there's monster animated creatures in the Matterhorn ride, that sort of thing could be enhancing of the version, the roller coaster building game that we were going to create. And I think that probably that game had more potential to expand the definition of a roller coaster game. But I'm not sure that it really accomplished it. It's one of those things that it wasn't great product that we were able to do, but it was kind of an experiment.
Well, and it had that definite experimentation vibe. It was like, well, let's see what people can do with this type of thing.
That was really kind of it. We took a shot.
Mm. And sometimes you got to do that. Is you never know where you're going to find the gold, so to speak.
That's true.
Okay, so your time at Disney comes to an end. Mm-hmm. Where do you go from there? Or why does it come to an end, I should ask?
Well, I very much enjoyed Disney. I enjoyed working there. I had no plans specifically to leave. It was the case, and without going into some other kind of corporate political story, Disney was the case that the different divisions of Disney were all starting to recognize the future potential value of interactive entertainment. So you had the movie division looking at, gee, we're using actors and scripts and directors and shooting film and turning it into a game. And so they said, no, we need to control Disney interactive. And then we had the consumer products division. Well, they were the ones who were actually building the games at that point. And there were other divisions in the company that were all starting to sort of politically vie for ownership or a stake in interactive. And at the time, the corporate heads basically said, gee, they didn't know where to go. They couldn't predict the future. So they asked us as the Disney Software Group to finish all the products that we had in the pipeline, and then don't start anything new until they can make a decision how to organize the rest of the company around this. And we sort of looked at each other and said, well, okay, how long is that going to take? And the answer came back as, well, we'll let you know.
Oh, wow. Yeah, no, that's not good.
So that wasn't very good. And kind of what happened was we literally finished all the games. We had all the projects, done, and we weren't able to start anything. And they were perfectly happy to let us just come to the office and hang out. But we didn't have to have any, projects to do because this higher level decision process was underway. But it went on for a few months, and then I think a lot of many members of the staff of the Disney, organization said, "Okay, I'm out of here." And at that time, because I had already had a kind of a well-established relationship with Sega through the licensing approval process of their games that they had licensed from Disney. I think you mentioned Quackshot yesterday.
Yes.
One of the heads of Sega came to me and said, "Hey, we'd love to have you come here." And so I kind of got recruited during this downtime at Disney to go to Sega. And Sega was located in the Bay Area, which is where I grew up. And I had family and all of this connections up there. And so I thought, well, okay, let's go do this. And so anyway, that's sort of how I went that way. And then Sega's motives in this case, they had previously established a group called the Sega Technical Institute, which was led by a fellow that I've known since Atari, a guy named Mark Cerny. And Mark, without going into long, lengthy stories, he was the head of the Sega Technical Institute, but he had decided to step out. And so that sort of created a vacuum that Sega wanted to fill. And they basically told me that they wanted me to come in and take over and manage what was their premier development group, really, because the Sega Technical Institute was well known for Sonic the Hedgehog, which was the company's most valuable property. It was the most successful game. It made giant piles of money and is even still famous today. That's sort of how things worked out, that I moved, back up to the Bay Area, Silicon Valley, and joined in. I literally walked in the door the same day that Mark walked out the door.
Oh, wow.
I walked into his office and we chatted because we already knew each other.
Mm.
And we chatted for a little bit, and he gave me his story, and then basically said, "Oh, good luck." And then I had this new group of people that I knew were very talented and very experienced and knew how to do stuff, and I basically had to sort of bring them together, organize them, and get them shoved in a direction that's going to be really productive for Sega, productive for them, and there were very, very high expectations for STI. Oh boy, they relied upon the corporation really relied upon things coming out of STI that would become major hits, and we had to do that, and we did that actually for several years. After I was there.
Now, so I just want to put this into a bit of a time scale. When approximately does this happen? Are you coming in there? I think it's 92 or 93.
Oh gosh, you asked me a tough question.
Oh,
those are tough questions. It was either 92 or 93. It was kind of in that zone.
Okay.
Yeah. I
can actually look up
what day of the week it is.
I can look up your LinkedIn profile.
Oh, okay.
Got it on there.
Oh, thank you.
Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. It was 93.
Okay. That sounds about right.
So tail end of 93. So you're in the middle of the console war with Nintendo at this point.
Yes.
Now,
Sonic 1 had been created and was already established. Sonic 2 was about to launch, and it was at the time that I came in. It wasn't finished, but it was well on its way, and so that was kind of my timing to join just before Sonic 2 launched.
Now, how much of Sonic 2 was being developed in Japan? How much of it was being developed in San Francisco?
It was all in San Francisco. It was all in San.
Okay. Yeah. And was your guys' job purely limited to U.S. development, or did you also have some kind of approval duties over product that was coming in from Japan?
We were pretty much a development group. We were given very few instructions. We were given a very free hand just because it was it was regarded as a kind of a prestigious group of game developers that were very capable of doing it. So they didn't tell us a lot. They did say requested that there be another Sonic game ready for next year's Christmas. That's
gotcha.
That's the magic combination that they wanted us to hit, and the standard for what was going to happen there just kept rising. We did do that. We made it happen. That was really difficult to do because of the rising standards and all the other stuff. I will say it was all done in the United States. The core team were three main Japanese guys, and there was actually a few others that came over from Japan to support them within the Sonic team. But Yuji Naka was the lead programmer. He was the head of the project. So he managed the project directly among the team members. Hirokazu Yasuhara was the lead designer, and he knew how to design very well. He was a great guy. I really enjoyed working with him. Very friendly. I'm going to go into my Japanese now and try and remember the names. But Kunitake Aoki was one of the leading artists. And anyway, I can't really, I shouldn't try to name all the people involved because I'll forget their names or butcher them somehow. But there was a handful of Japanese guys that were the central core and the most experienced ones with Sonic. But they were also supported by, it was probably 50 people roughly at STI. And there were multiple projects, even though the only one I'm talking about is Sonic. We had several projects, both coin-op and consumer games, going on, simultaneously inside of STI.
Now, that's interesting because I've always imagined the Technical Institute as being a console development studio. That was always sort of my conception. So you guys were also working on an arcade product. Yeah. Now, there are a couple of issues there. Number one, when you're developing arcade product for a company that is also producing home consoles, how much of the design decision-making process leans on the home portability of the game? Or is that even a factor at that point in time?
At that point in time, I'd say it really wasn't a factor. I mean, it might have been a vague consideration, but it was not something that was considered a criteria for doing development on a title, to have it be like this on this platform and that on that. Now, it was really all about making the original team, the visionaries, the creative guys, who can actually do the best job they possibly can on whatever it is, launches that particular title, and then if it's a hit, it'll have value being ported to other platforms. But it wasn't, at least at that time, considered to be a requirement to do everything all at once.
Gotcha. Now, you're coming in end of '93. You've got Sonic 2 about to come out. Obviously, the Genesis still has some legs on it, but you must, I'm guessing you already knew that you were also going to have to start developing for both the 32X and the Saturn at this point.
Yes.
So coming in, did you already know that those two new platforms were coming, or was that something they briefed you on once you got there?
Once I got there, that was really, part of the debriefing of, what to expect coming downstream. There wasn't a lot of activity, particularly game title activity, at that, in the early days, in my early days there, because it was really more about coming up with the actual technology design, and the core of the technology design was sort of split up. It was being competitively worked on between different groups. So there wasn't, different hardware groups. So there was kind of an internal competition going on there between different internal groups that were trying to build the basic functionality of the next generation hardware. And so nobody wanted to get too involved in software development until that kind of really basic decision got established.
Gotcha. So it's basically you guys were just waiting to see who was going to win between Saturn and 32X.
Yeah, basically.
I have to ask, obviously in hindsight, looking back at it, it was not Sega's finest hour. And was the, put it nicely, and I'll add a bleep in the episode to this, that was those two products. Was it apparent right from the get-go internally from the software developer standpoint, or did that just sort of emerge over time?
Well, there were very competitive groups, and without going into the corporate politics of it, we basically kept our heads down and worked on Sonic games and the other games that were locked down, established hardware platforms, I had my preferences based on being debriefed about this and saying, okay, this is going to do this, but this is going to be strong like that. And I kind of had my preferences, but I had no say. I was completely, prepared to accept however that decision got made. But it doesn't surprise me that it wasn't, a clean decision, a clean call that was made. I mean, I love the Sega guys. There were so many people tried really hard to do the best they possibly could, and this was just one of those situations that when I could kind of see it coming eventually, but all I could do was just kind of keep our heads down and finish what we were doing, make sure that those turned out well.
Gotcha. And so you're developing a slate of products, and I mentioned this off air earlier, but there is one particular game I do have to ask about, and I wanted to know if that was before if it already started developing before you got there, or if it was something that was developed after you arrived, and that was Comic Zone, which
one of my favorites.
It is still my favorite Genesis title, just because I'm gonna let me gush just a little bit. I have to go a little bit into fanboy territory. The concept of using the comic book panels as a division line for action in a game. The fact that, comic panels had been displayed in games for cutscenes and all sorts of stuff before that, but actually building them into the game world was just, it gave so many opportunities for go this way or go that way, interacting with things. The speech bubbles made, instead of having to break to a cutscene, it was a lot of the stuff we take for granted today, in-game engine cutscenes and story elements. It's right there. It's brilliant. So what is the germ of that idea? How does that one come about?
Wow, I'm impressed that you saw exactly the same thing that I saw when it was presented to me as a concept. We had one fellow. We had a creative game design guy. He was from Europe. His name was Peter Morwick. And he had a very interesting story himself, sort of escaping adversity in Europe back in the day and coming to the United States with only one goal, with only one objective. As a young man, he wanted to come to the United States to join Sega. And that was it. That was his whole story. He had to come. And he's one, it's kind of like he knocked on the front door and said, "I'm here, and I've spent the last year and a half, hitchhiking to get here, and now I want to design games." And he did not have a background in gaming, creating games, but he had very compelling ideas that he could describe. He was a very excellent artist. And he asked me if because he reported to me, and he asked me if he could, show me a game design that he had. And I said, sure. What you got? And he pulls out a video that he had created of the cartoon panels with an animated character running around between the cartoon panels. And my jaw dropped. I said, "That's amazing. That's really cool. That's something that we've got to do." And the unfortunate part at that moment was everyone was busy, so we couldn't just stop what we were doing to jump on it. But after this is a little while later, when certain projects had finished up, I had a priority to turn that guy as the head of a team that would produce that game, and he did it. And that's where Comic Zone came from, is the vision of Peter Morwick, Yeah, there were several other really talented people contributing to it, but uh, that was a kind of a signature piece for STI beyond everything Sonic.
Yeah, and this is why I always have that was the game where I first heard about the existence of STI, and and so it kind of was like, okay, that's what STI is doing. You know, this stuff that just took it to a different level. It tried to do something different with the medium at a moment when things started to feel quite stale. I mean, you get into the later years of the 16-bit wars and everything is starting, okay, I'm moving from left to right and I'm beating stuff up again. Okay, I'm an RPG from the top and I'm doing rescuing the princess. But that really just was like, okay, I'm gushing a little bit because it really was a very, very impactful presentation, game mechanics. The art style was brilliant. There was a lot going on in that.
Well, I couldn't agree more. I was blown away at how professionally intuitive it was in so many ways that we could have built a lot more around it. If the first game was successful, the second and the third, this could become a big deal through time, and all of that was kind of buzzing in my head. And when we actually got to make it, that was pretty exciting.
Yeah. Now, there was no sequel, so
Yes.
I'm going to guess that those sales numbers never materialized.
Well, actually, the sales numbers did pretty well. What happened was, and this is a little parallel story, but the corporate political environment of Sega evolved away from what had been the case that sort of made everything work for us. A lot of it had to do with the next generation hardware not taking off, and there were a number of important people in Sega of America, which was different. We were not a division of Sega of America. We were really a completely independent corporate entity within Sega. But Sega of America, we lived in their backyard, and I was able to work with some very, very talented creative marketing people and such. They're marketing our projects, and one thing led to another, and several of the senior leadership of Sega of America left the company during what started as sort of their downturn, and I think that I've kind of attributed the reasons for not being able to move forward with Comic Zone as a franchise had as much to do with kind of the decline of the direction, vision for where the whole company wanted to go, because of people like Tom Kalinske and the various senior executive leadership of Sega basically just left. They went on to do other things, and that was kind of a period of decline.
Gotcha. It's very sad. I mean, the game even got a port to PC around that time, and so it just felt like a missed opportunity, unfortunately.
I think so. Mm-hmm.
Now, going back a little bit more to the general process, because you guys were very much designed or set up to be experimental, to try new things, what was the approval process for a product usually like?
There was a kind of an inner circle of senior executives that I could sit down with and say, here's what we have coming up. What do you think? And we would collaborate. It was. I think that it would be fair to say that all of the sort of key decision makers were friendly, cooperative collaborators. And we were basically, when we wanted to do another project, just a project that would come from Sega Technical Institute, sort of came with some pre-credibility. Even though we tried things that, were very experimental. We did some stuff that really hadn't been done before. We were given some latitude to be able to experiment, try new things. Sometimes it wasn't even like a full title, game title. It just might be some special effects or a special aspect of a game, just to see how well it works. There were different expectations. Not everything had to be a massive hit, but we had to derive some kind of value that we were looking to derive. And that was overall, it really was regarded as I was told by others, that Sega, that STI was considered the premium development entity within the company, and everyone sort of tried to keep it that way.
Now, the transition to 3D development for the Saturn, and what was that transition like? How easy, how difficult, and what role did arcade development play in that?
Well, so much of transitioning into 3D, of course, it's really all about the technology that you're adapting and what can you do with it. I think creatively, we didn't have any real struggle with coming up with the ideas for what to do with it. There are some technical aspects of, making the graphics work the way you want. The limitations of the technology, the PC, or the processing that you had to address in order to make certain types of effects work. There's a learning curve on that, and when everyone is doing it for the first time, it takes a few iterations before it gets really slick. Although we didn't really have a lot of difficulty, a lot of real problems there. I do remember that we tried some things that didn't work in the lab, so to speak, but we could back down a little bit and maybe reduce our aspirations, or try not to have too many giant explosions happening all at the same moment, or whatever. And that kind of thing was, it was solvable. It was all solvable. There was very, very talented technical people too that, they made it work. Ultimately, we were generally pretty happy with what we were able to get out there. I know that we would do better today if we'd had many more years and iterations of experience at it, but that was kind of the same thing for everyone at that time.
Gotcha. Yeah, and now I do have to ask about one title, Sonic Extreme, here, because that is often considered, and you can please correct me if this common portrayal is wrong, the downfall of the Sega Technical Institute.
I can tell you that project did not even get started until after I left.
Okay, that's good to know.
It was not a project at the time that I left.
Okay.
It got started by other people, and I didn't have anything to do with it. Okay.
Now, and because you guys were so closely linked to the Sonic franchise, and was there any experimentation what would Sonic look like in 3D on the Saturn being done at STI?
Oh yeah, oh yeah. When there was an opportunity to visualize Sonic as 3D, we were out there, experimenting, seeing what we could do. Before there was the context of putting it into a specific game.
Gotcha. And how far did you guys get on something that would have been a passable and realizable game design?
One of the things that, because after the conclusion of, we did Sonic 3 after Sonic 2, and then Sonic and Knuckles, and then there's kind of weird connective story tissue that runs through all of that, because it wasn't just it wasn't multiple projects done in sequence. It was like one gigantic project that got divided and separated up into chunks that became these series of different games. But where was I going with this? I think it was,
Sonic.
Yeah.
Sonic in 3D is where we started, but
yeah, Sonic in 3D was visualized before any Sonic was going to actually show up in 3D. All of the Sonic-y games that that I was connected to were developed by either the original team, the Japanese team. We had another team that sort of stepped in and helped through a period that really was sort of crying out for Sonic that wasn't going to show up from the Japanese team. And so we filled a gap with one developed by a different team. That one was Sonic Spinball, I think. And anyway, trying to maintain a continuity of Sonic through all of those ups and downs, plus anticipating a 3D Sonic that was coming. We kind of knew that, and we were playing with it before we actually integrated it in, because in some ways, Sonic was to Sega what Mickey Mouse was to Disney. And in fact, before I even went there, I had heard a story told by the CEO of Sega challenging his creative teams to create Mickey Mouse for Sega, the equivalent of Mickey Mouse, meaning a world-renowned, fun character that could, exist in the gaming world in a variety of ways. And so that was sort of a goal objective that underlay the creation of Sonic in the first place. And I guess one of the things that I brought to this was my previous Disney experience and dealing with and knowing how character creation and character development needs certain types of consistency and style, but also needs to facilitate innovation in its own way. Requires that you really understand what the character is, what's the core appeal, who is the target audience. All that kind of stuff is something that I was able to kind of help create in addition to the actual work doing the games. And yes, we're describing a several year period of time where it just took off and was amazingly successful on a global scale. And then competition came, and Sega basically wasn't able to deliver some of the kinds of things that they wanted to. And so, it needed to be reworked and rethought.
Gotcha.
I was kind of out of it at that point.
Okay. And before we do leave Sega, I also wanted to ask, because I've started this whole bit with the rivalry with Nintendo. Obviously, you're there as the Saturn is launching in Japan. The PlayStation is launched in Japan. What role did you guys spend a lot of time looking and thinking about what competitive products from other companies look like while you were experimenting and trying to figure out what to do next?
We couldn't avoid looking at them, of course. It was important and valuable just to see what was coming out there. From a sort of a technology standpoint, there wasn't a lot of challenge anticipated from Sony at Sega. They thought, well, it's kind of a TV company. It's not a gaming company, and they hadn't really got themselves established. And how are they going to get really good games from really good game developers on the Sony system? And so there was maybe a little bit of arrogance at Sega, kind of dismissing that. And it turns out, they did just fine, as everyone knows. And Nintendo was a different type and style of competitor. Of course, Sega being a Japanese, based company, and of course Nintendo also, there was a different sense of competitiveness between them. But for the most part, I would say the attitudes about what could be done and should be done was really just offered and left to STI to come up with what we could do without there being a lot of push and shove from the various groups outside of STI. We were really isolated. We were intentionally so. We were locked up in a building that I had a key to, and the president of Sega of America didn't have a key to. So we were really we weren't a secret because everybody knew we were there, but you had to get an appointment to get into STI because it was this really secret kind of place. And we were really given a lot of latitude to kind of do what we wanted to do.
Very cool. So, why do you leave Sega? Well,
I really enjoyed Sega. It was an amazing experience. The only real reason I could probably cite was that so many members of the team that I had worked with, the senior team, the executive team, the Sega of America team, that were really important and valuable to working with, the marketing people, all of that stuff. They left. They just started draining out one at a time, and as Sega left its senior, as they vacated the senior staff at Sega of America, they were replaced by other people. And to some extent, I knew these other people too, because from having been in the games business a long time. And there was a kind of a time when I just decided that there were maybe some other things I wanted to try to do. I had done a lot of what I had wanted to do at Sega, and I wanted to try some other kinds of things. So I personally made the decision to step back and do some other things.
Gotcha.
That weren't games. I did not go immediately into games.
What did you do in between?
I've actually, it doesn't show up on my
on your LinkedIn profile.
On my LinkedIn. No. I have had a parallel career for my entire time in games as an artist.
Oh.
And as a fine art painter. And I've painted many paintings that currently hang in various galleries around the world. They're in various museums around the world. I have had for decades people asking me to, commission me to do paintings for them. And I've always had to kind of push that whole thing away in order to make the games happen. And so my conclusion with Sega, it was really an opportunity for me to really jump into doing some more painting and fine art, which I really, really enjoyed. And it has been a lot of fun. And nobody knows about that. Anybody that knows me, they either think of me as, oh, he's the games guy, or they know me as the artist painter guy. But I don't blend, that they don't know sort of both sides of that. But it's kind of the result of having two sort of career passions.
Gotcha. And I'm guessing that these are mostly cars that you're doing the paintings of, correct?
Well, yeah, I actually do all kinds and types and styles. But as it turns out, the car paintings started decades ago with some friends of mine who said, gee, can you paint me a picture of my car? And I said, sure, I can do that. And I gave him a painting, and then he had friends that all came to me and wanted me to give them a painting. And I did. I wasn't charging for this stuff. I was just having fun. One thing led to another, but then it turned into a great big deal. And then there were famous car collectors and museums, car museums around the world, and car companies around the world that I've been creating for and doing work for. And I've really enjoyed that. It's really been a lot of fun. I enjoy doing other kinds of paintings completely. And sometimes some experimental contemporary art is something that I've also done quite a lot of. But as it turns out, I tend to be really connected to seems to be car paintings, which is, I always think that's weird, but it is what it is. I like it. And then the other part is the games and gaming. Now, I also have started several companies, and doing startups is sort of another sort of thing that I've enjoyed. And between Sega and Universal, I had worked on some startup project ideas that could eventually turn themselves into products. But I also basically got recruited by my next employer, which was Universal, to come in and do for them kind of what I had done with Disney, which was Universal Studios was anticipating the explosion, integration, expansion of the entertainment industry with interactive technology. And they had their own people. Some of them were from Sega that basically referenced me and said, hey, why don't you get Roger to come in and help us expand our footprint in Silicon Valley. And so that's one thing led to another, and I didn't have to move. So I was able to get an office building in San Jose and recruit several game development friends of mine that we'd all had experience working together, and started doing Universal Studios product franchises as a way to bring interactive entertainment into the expertise category of Universal, which they did not have at that time. They were just complete starting from scratch at that time. So that was a very interesting project. It went for several years, and a lot of weird stories, about working in Hollywood and hanging around the Universal Studios lot with a bunch of celebrities and all that kind of stuff. But for the most part, we worked on some games for Universal. We also I did consulting with some of their TV show executives and their film people. We did a game called Xena Warrior Princess back in the day when Xena was this huge TV show. And I worked with the executives that made that TV show, and they asked me to write some pieces of stories for their show that I could incorporate into our game. So it was a co-creative sort of process, and that was just too much fun sounding to turn that down. So I got a chance to work on some TV shows and things like that. Universal was very different than Sega than Disney. They're two totally different companies, but they kind of do the same things. They have theme parks and movies and TV shows and all of those similar things. So that was a different chapter for me. It was my period with Universal.
Now, I'm going to repeat a similar question that I asked with Disney. The access to licenses, was it just assumed that you guys would automatically get first dibs to create games based off of licenses that the company owned, or did you have to actually lobby the licensing department to be able to develop product?
There were a couple of different categories that would be the answer to that question. The categories of classic Universal properties that everyone knows, we didn't have any competition for. We could just go do it. So things like the classic Universal monsters, Frankenstein, Wolfman, Dracula, that were based on movies that were made back in the 20s and the 30s, but became part of American culture and still are, a big deal. Those characters we were able to just secure by saying, we're going to do something. Things like Xena, I kind of had to lobby with the actual property creators that were still alive and still there, and that's kind of how we got together to work together mutually on a game and a TV show simultaneously. But that would have been one that we would have had to have done extra things to try and secure. There were other properties at Universal that we could have tried for, but we were literally a startup in this great big giant corporation. I was the division president of digital arts for Universal, and everyone thought that was a big deal until they found out that, that's about 12 people. It's just not that big a deal.
Gotcha. Now, considering the size of the team, I'm guessing that the actual game development was happening outside of Universal.
Actually, it was really happening inside. We were staffing up. We started with 3 game developers, characters, and then we expanded, and then we kept bringing in, and I could contract out to others who weren't direct employees, and we were able to get several games, through the system, so to speak. But we were a startup. There's no question about it.
Okay. Now, there is one game that Universal is probably best known for that was not based off of any of their movies, which was Crash Bandicoot.
Right.
Now, was the deal to publish that title already done when you arrived, or was that something that you shepherded into the company?
No, I can't lay any claim to Crash. That was already underway here. Again, it involved people that I knew, that I've known for many years. Even gosh, his name slipped out of my mind. He was the former head of STI, Mark Cerny.
Yeah.
Mark was part of that, and that was prior to my joining Universal. So once I got there, there was a certain amount of arranging and rearranging and kind of trying to get organized. But there was parallel efforts being done around Crash Bandicoot that was great. I mean, that was great. I'm happy for what they did and how they could do it.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, also, it almost became the Sonic, or in many ways, it was the Sonic for the PlayStation.
Yeah.
So, how did that cooperation with Sony come about? I mean, the fact that Sony, it seemed like Sony was actually paying for a lot of the marketing of the product.
Yeah, it was a very cooperative project, largely because the game looked so good in the beginning. It tested really well. The character, it had the right combination of sort of cartoon characters that appealed to a middle age range group, not little kids. So the target audience all kind of fell into the similar categories as things like Crash. It checked a lot of boxes, and it did very, very well. It was it looked great, had great game design in there, and very good humor, a lot of funny stuff. So Sony could figure that out.
Definitely. Now, you leave there in 1999. Why do you leave, and where do you go?
The quick story on why I left really had to do with I had to make a decision. I had a personal contract that was expiring, and I had to either renew it or move on. And I decided to move on, largely because there were some other very interesting opportunities that were kind of sitting in the wings for me. And the Universal Studios corporate environment was very challenging for me from the standpoint that there was tremendous ongoing turnover. And I mean, there are a lot of stories attached to this, but the leaders of Universal were, they had different experience levels when they took over. And let's just say I was one of 7 divisional presidents of Universal. But I had 5 different bosses in 3 years.
Oh, that's tough.
So regardless of how everything works, from the ground up, from the top down, it was always churning and changing. And that, as much as anything, sort of caused me to say, okay, when my contract is up, I'm going to do something else, because it was very difficult to make progress reliably in an environment that's so volatile. And of course, not very long after I left, Universal sold from company A to company B, and it just kept going, is really the point. So there was a lot of turnover and changing policies and all of that, and I just thought I would probably enjoy doing something else.
Gotcha.
Which I did. I joined. I was one of the co-founders of a startup company that was a really interesting combination of new technology in a completely different application. Which was bringing new technology to retail stores in shopping malls, which sounds like, oh my God, how far away from games can you get? And it really was actually kind of cool, because the concept of enterprise, what was called enterprise broadcasting. I was the COO of this little startup, starting with just nothing and then building it up into a chain of theaters that existed in shopping malls. And the theaters were all interactive theaters, with each seat having its own terminal that you could buy stuff from that was presented, in the high definition shows that were presented on the big screens. And high definition was brand new at that time. It was before high def had been inculcated into the movie theaters. All the movie theaters at that time were low def, and we were building the very first chain of high def movie theaters that were actually stores, kind of masquerading as theaters. And it was a very, very interesting project. It had some very positive aspects, and then some difficult parts of it being a startup and all that kind of thing. But that was really where I went after Universal, because it sounded like it would be quite a fun project. And so that was go ahead.
No, and I was going to say you're still dealing with interactivity and interactive programming. It's just not the same type of interaction, but it's still real-time processing of inputs from the user.
Yeah, no, and it was combining entertainment, because the shows that were performed, they weren't like infomercials or commercials. They were short format program shows that were intended to be entertaining, but you could also buy stuff relative to these shows. We had Disney as a sponsor, promoting things like Disney cruises in short format programming. We had Chrysler, selling cars in the mall, which is someplace they couldn't get to normally. And anyway, all of that sort of stuff was quite innovative and really a lot of fun. And I enjoyed sort of bringing that, making that happen too.
Very cool. And also that's right around the time when the .com boom is going crazy. Yes. So yes. I'm sure that probably played some role in starting a company. I don't know if you actually got to the IPO phase.
We didn't get to an IPO, but we did A, B, and C rounds of investment funding, which was kind of a whole new world unto itself. And raising money during that period of time was shockingly easy to do. And we believed that we had a really legitimate foundation to build a much bigger business around. And yeah, we did raise money, and we built all this stuff. We built different theater stores, and we had all the sponsors, but it turns out there were other problems that sort of got in the way of that project. And I also subsequently was offered an opportunity to design a car, believe it or not. And I went, oh my God, I've wanted to do this ever since I was a little kid. So I was ultimately wound up as the founder owner of the Anteros Coachworks company. And Anteros Coachworks was a sports car manufacturing company that I started. And I designed the car. It was all carbon fiber, so it was kind of it was exotic and cool and very high performance, and it was kind of the fulfillment of a lifetime dream project for me, and setting it up and actually manufacturing them and selling them to other people was also quite something. So that was yet another little project that got fit in here between games.
Well, a 6-year project.
Yeah, well,
nothing
you can't
to
do it overnight.
Yeah. And it's kind of cool that, despite your we talked about it at the beginning of the interview, despite your divergence into other fields, the fact that the design itch, especially for cars, finally got fulfilled is really, really, I mean, it's inspirational almost.
It was a sort of a magic moment for me, and I didn't spend any time logically analyzing it. I just said, yeah, I'll do it. And yeah, it did take some time. I mean, we're talking about years of prep work, building prototypes, and literally taking a prototype automobile to a large auction house that sells to very wealthy car collectors assembled from all over the world, and being able to actually take production orders for these cars at an event like that was something that I never even imagined that I could actually pull off. But we did do it, and it was a fun project. It was kind of a long-term realization of a dream that I had as a little kid. So there's always problems doing that sort of thing, but that's it really did what I was hoping it would do, and I got out of it what I wanted to, and I have one of those cars sitting in my garage right now. So yeah.
That was going to be my next question. Did you actually get to keep one?
Well, I had to buy one back. The original production run of cars that were delivered to their owners got cut way short because the factory I had contracted with wound up. They went belly up.
Oh, wow.
They went bankrupt in the middle of my production run, and so. Only a couple of the cars got actually delivered to owners. And my expectation was I was going to, build a bunch before I would take one for myself. And I didn't get one. But 7 years after everything went away, I went to an auction, and the guy that bought the original #1 car decided he wanted to sell it. So I just went and bought it. And that's kind of how that went.
Very, very
story.
Cool. Very cool.
Story, but, oh well.
So after that project was over, right back into games?
Yeah. It was literally after that. I was recruited by Namco Bandai, and they had. They were familiar with me from my previous sort of experiences at Sega, being a Japanese company. They had made some large investments in Western gaming building beyond what they were originally founded on, which was building the games in Japan. And so they were expanding on a global basis, and they wanted to have more of a Western focus on the development of new game titles that would be more international in their potential appeal. And so, one thing led to another. It was another great group of people. I really enjoyed them. They were a lot of fun to work with. They had a series of projects that had been started that were having trouble. And part of my task was to figure out how to fix them. And some of them got canceled, but most all of them got turned around and finished and did very well. And the games that were being made there were managed to come out in a very high quality state. I was very pleased with them. It was really an interesting whole project unto itself. And so I think it generally was regarded by just about everyone to be a successful investment of time and energy. But I also, I was there for several years and then finally decided to step back. So what can I say? I kind of averaged 3 or 4 years where I go, and I was 7 years at Atari initially, but the game business. It turns out the game business evolves at a very rapid pace, and the entire industry, the entire business, the business model changes. We used to be selling plastic game cartridges in boxes in retail stores. And of course, that's long gone. And now we're moving into a transition period into subscription-based online interactive downloaded entertainment. And that is sort of, there have been other iterative versions of business model changes between then and now. And so it's been a very interesting, series of experiences that I have enjoyed and I've worked through and had certainly some successes along the way. Not everything works out that way, and that's just the way that is. But yeah, after Bandai Namco. Or Namco Bandai, depending upon how you refer to it, because the guys inside, depending upon who you're talking to, some call it Namco Bandai and some call it Bandai Namco. Because they were two companies, independent Japanese companies, that supposedly merged but maintained competitive with one another. And if you're in Japan, it's called Bandai Namco. And if you're in the United States, it's primarily called Namco Bandai, because Namco was more successfully well-known and established name associated with Pac-Man.
Yeah.
And the Bandai games largely were successful in Japan. Anyway, that's just a whole other thing. But it's the core name of the game and of the company, and it flip-flops depending upon where you are. So I sometimes mess up and say the wrong thing.
No problem. It sounds like both of them are correct depending on where you're at.
Yes, that's true. No, that's true.
Now, I know we're getting a little long on time here. Can I get another 10 minutes of your time to wrap a couple things up?
That'd be fine.
Okay. Now, at Bandai Namco, you are doing some online game stuff. Mm-hmm. And now, from a producer standpoint, when you're budgeting a game, when it's the old, like you said with EA, a disc in a box, mm-hmm. You have a budget, okay, this is what it's going to take to get the game. Once it goes off in the box, you're barring some edits or something, you're done with it. Mm-hmm. You might also be able to get some extra budget out of tools that were developed that can later be reused. Mm-hmm. An online game obviously has ongoing expenses with the game. How did that? What was? How easily did the old budgeting skills apply to that new environment?
It did. You used the word easily. How easily did that happen? It didn't happen.
Okay.
It basically went from one monetization business model to a different one. And let's say there's even still a fair amount of learning going on associated with that transition, because one thing I did want to talk about a little bit was just what I'm doing right now.
Yes.
Because it actually dovetails into what the subject that you brought up, which is the business monetization process for modern, ongoing, networked games. It primarily boils down to things like in-app purchases combined with advertising that gets sold. And the in-app purchases and the advertising are sort of the most common big picture ways that modern online games can make a profit. And if they have a large enough install base, of which there are numerous titles that have massive online user bases, they can make a lot of money. It really can. But it's, if you're starting from scratch with something brand new, it's a bigger challenge. And one of the things that I am doing literally right now is in the process of launching an educational game. It is an online esports targeted game that's designed for multiplayers to play simultaneously across mobile and PC platforms. And it's a game that is really designed to be fun to play competitively with other players, not because you carry a gun and you're going to shoot them, but because you're starting a business. You're an entrepreneur and you're starting a business, and you get to start all these different kinds of businesses that are in the game, and you try to compete with other players based on your knowledge of competing profitably and learning the reality of how real profitable businesses work. And it sounds like, gee, there's an educational side of it, but in the esports world, it's actually going to be quite possible for a player to make money themselves playing this game, and the game costs nothing. There's absolutely no costs associated with it all. So everything is completely free. There's no in-app purchases. There's no advertising. And that's because it's funded by a wonderful nonprofit foundation that is literally putting, many big piles of money into creating and operating this game on a global scale without charging anything for it. They want to make the world a better place. That's the entire goal of Venture Bally. So I just wanted to mention that, and it's a whole interesting new thing, and something that I've enjoyed kind of starting and now concluding really about now as it's about to go into the market.
Now, what's the expected launch date of the title?
It's technically soft launched right now.
Oh, okay.
So you can actually download it for free on Steam. You can download it on in the App Store or on Google Play. But it hasn't been promoted yet. We haven't turned on the marketing spigot. So basically, people don't know that it's there. And we're not going to do that until we work out, some of the startup technical launch issues that are somewhat inevitable on any game of this type. Literally, it hasn't been in the market for more than a week or 2 weeks, and it probably won't start being promoted and advertised until a few weeks from now. But we have already established corporate connections with. There's a large international company called Discovery Education. You've probably heard of the Discovery Channel on TV. They have a whole education division that has already adopted Venture Bally as part of their curriculum and is going to be appearing in thousands and tens of thousands of classrooms everywhere quite soon. And we have partnerships with several large universities who are also using it. The target audience is high school and college age.
Oh, cool.
And so it actually, carries a fair amount of educational weight through those groups, but it only looks like you're having fun. It's got a bunch of crazy characters that run around and do silly stuff. So we'll see how it all works out, but it's in that very, very beginning stage right now.
Very cool. That brings us up to today. There's one final question that I ask all of my interview subjects.
Sure.
It's a two-parter. Looking back at your career, what was one trend that you thought was going to hit big that fizzled out, that didn't go anywhere? And what was one trend that hit big that you did not see coming?
Oh, man, that's a tough one. There have been so many that have come and gone. There was a time that it's like a light bulb went on in my head. I was working at Atari, and the premise that I joined Atari under was that this was just a short-term gig that wasn't really going to last. And every game had the potential to be the last thing that Atari did, but everything sort of continued on. And there was a moment when it kind of dawned on me after having a series of successes that, gee, this might actually, the video game thing might become a business. It might actually last. And that was like a revelation to me because I hadn't even vaguely thought of that. and I'll be darned, I mean, look at it today. It's bigger. The video game industry globally is larger than the movie business, the television business, all professional sports combined. The total revenue on a global basis is bigger in games than anything else. That would have just seemed like total science fiction back in the day. But there was that moment that I just went, wow, this might actually turn out to be real. And gosh, there are other things. I was a strong potential advocate of virtual reality in the early, in its earliest iterations. And I had some experiences even at Sega because Sega developed some virtual reality products that they put in the market in Japan. It didn't come to the United States. And they launched it in Japan and it didn't work. And they were trying to figure out why, what is it was wrong about this. And I was asked, to analyze it and to try and say what's going on. And I kind of thought it was really cool because you put these this headset on and you had computer monitors and, in your eyes and you were running around seeing the world. And it turns out that what they didn't realize as a production group was that the primary target audience for that were kids. And a lot of younger kids. And when you put a virtual reality headset on a child and they get into playing a game, they're typically rolling around on the floor in their living room in front of where the TV would be, because that's where the game system would be hooked up. And parents would walk into the room and would be appalled at not being able to connect with their kid. Yeah. Because they try and talk to him and the kid was, had the earphones and was locked into his own world. And the disconnect between being in reality and as a child and being disconnected from your parents was so appalling to the parents. The parents just ripped the headsets off the kids, took them back to the store and returned them. Oh, wow. And that was a very early lesson that subsequently, and that was a long time ago. That was in the Sega days. Recently, I acted as a consultant to a large corporation that builds theme parks. I won't mention their name, but they build theme parks, and they were under contract to China to build a Chinese VR theme park. Okay. And they asked me to look at all the stuff that they had done and to comment on it. And I had to tell them this is not going to work. It's just not going to work. There's some serious legal problems with what you are setting out to do. And you, as an attorney, would appreciate that the profound impact on the human brain from conflicting information coming into the brain from the eyes and the ears. As soon as you have conflicting information, the brain starts to really get wound up. And it takes a while for not everyone, because not everyone is affected the same way, but a chunk of the population is going to be negatively affected by that experience, to the point where if they get in their car and drive their family home after being in the park, that they're going to crash the car. And if you can think of some legal problems associated with that, you can imagine that this would be quite problematic for a VR theme park that's trying to emulate something like a Disneyland kind of park, only done virtually. That has all of these negative potential human issues that haven't been solved with VR yet. It may still happen, but hasn't happened yet. So yeah, I don't know. That's what I got.
Those are perfect answers. I love it. Roger, I cannot thank you enough for giving me of your time. This really has been a fascinating journey, because very, very few people have the extensive career experience that you have throughout all of these different phases of the industry and different perspectives, different markets, arcade, console, computer, and so forth. So thank you very much.
You're very welcome. It was, it's kind of fun. I don't sit around and think about this stuff. So I kind of, it was sort of enjoyable to just kind of remember a lot of it. And I've been primarily heads down focused on trying to put Venture Valley into the marketplace, and we'll see how it goes. There's no guarantee you ever get, but it does look like there's some reasonable chances that this will happen, and I'll give you a heads up.
Perfect. I appreciate it. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good evening. Take care.
Okay. Bye-bye.